Good afternoon, and today you can see it's the end, but I hope will be an end as the beginning. So it's the last of the 6 lectures. So I want to first thank the National Gallery of Art again for inviting me to give these series of talks. I also want to thank the Center for Advanced Study in the Visual Arts for providing me with a wonderful intellectual environment during these 7 weeks. And also to all of you in the audience for your support and your interest. I really appreciate it. So let me begin. The Qing dynasty, and indeed China's entire dynastic history, reached its end in February 1912. So that's the key year for today, is 1912. When the last emperor, Pu Yi, abdicated the throne, transferring power to the republic government established earlier that year. To celebrate the occasion, Shanghai's China Book Company printed a poster and distributed for free, titled A Calendar Poster of the First Year of the Republic of China. It features Sun Yat-sen, the newly elected provisional president of the Republic. In the lower center of the poster, under the 5-striped Republican flag and his official title, you see the middle part. Sporting a Western suit with his short hair freely parted, Sun appears as a personal embodiment of the modern nation state. A pair of color panels flank his image to display not 1, but 2 calendars for the year. The international solar calendar to the right, and the traditional Chinese lunar calendar to the left. A third feature of this poster, nothing new to us, but exceptional at the time, is the use of photography to portray the first Chinese president. The visual novelty of this black and white image can be better recognized if we compare it with another calendar poster published less than months before, displaying a group of political leaders, including Sun Yat-sen, in the bright colors of a woodcut print. The 3 features of the Republican poster, namely Sun's Western queue-less appearance, the dual calendars, and the use of photography, visually signify this seminal historical moment and reveal its semantic complexity. Why were multiple calendars employed to mark this moment? What did the Chinese public see in Sun's attire and hairstyle? Why use a photographic portrait rather than a more common woodcut or lithographic one? Why celebrate this political event with a calendar poster rather than a grand historical painting or a monumental sculpture? Guided by these questions, this lecture explores an emerging visual culture in early 20th century China, which, as I will suggest, self-consciously reflected on its newness and hybridity. Actually, newness is hybridity. So I start from calendar as a kind of representation of time. Among the 3 features, the dual calendars most noticeably reveal the eclectic tendency of the new nation state. One day after the founding of the Republic on January 1st, 1912, Sun Yat-sen announced the government's adoption of the Georgian calendar to better synchronize China with the world. But the traditional Chinese calendar was not abandoned, and as a subsequent decree reaffirmed, would be used, quote unquote, side by side with the new Western calendar. The official designations of the founding year of the Republic betray other compromises. First, although the new regime abolished the practice of marking years with the emperor's title or era names, it nevertheless named this year as the first year of the Republic, which would be followed by the second, third, fourth year, etc., to infinity. So we are reminded of the first emperor who envisioned the Qin dynasty he established 2,200 years before as an eternal regime starting from 0 point. So here again, we have this mentality, oh, history starts from 0 point because it is the first year. But in the Republican case, a clear breakaway from the past was immediately canceled by another decision made at the same time. Impelled by an anti-Manchu sentiment, the founding fathers of modern China also traced the origin of the Republic to the legendary Yellow Emperor in antiquity. As a result, the newborn Republic was framed within multiple temporal systems, and its birth year was written in 3 different ways, as 民国元年, or the first year of the Republic, as the year of 4609 in the so-called Yellow Emperor calendar, and as 1912年, or the year of 1912. This complex situation offers a window to look into the formative process of early Republican visual culture, in which calendar posters constituted a major component. As our historian Alan Lan has observed, in the late 19th and early 20th century China, I quote, calendar posters were everywhere. They were given as a merchant's gift or sold in bazaar stalls on the streets. They were rewards to customers who purchased specified monetary amounts of products, or were offered to attract magazine subscribers, end quote. Lan's summary is vividly illustrated by a cartoon from the 1909 to 1910 issue of a pictorial daily, 图画日报, published in Shanghai. A street vendor is seated below a row of calendar posters hanging on a wall, with a row of extra stock by his knees. You can see here, those are 4 posters hanging on the wall, and there are more posters. His peddler's cry is conveyed by the text at the top. Colorful calendar posters are beautifully printed. At 10 cents or so, they are quite cheap. Please, sir, buy one to take home, to hang it in your room. You will easily remember the Sundays in each month when you can rest and do not need to go to work. Stay home, your wife will surely be pleased. Even stretchily drawn, the 4 posters hanging on the wall clearly feature foreign ships and buildings, as well as international flags and emblems. I think you can easily see like foreign ships, not Chinese ships. And here, foreign buildings, there are international flags. Here is probably a Chinese landscape painting. Starting from the late 19th century, this type of calendar poster began to flood treaty boards, such as Shanghai and Hong Kong, becoming a regular element of the local culture scene. Produced mainly by Western companies based in these and other treaty ports, these calendar posters / commercial advertisements facilitated an aggressive campaign to promote their mercantile and services to Chinese consumers. For this reason, for this purpose, the posters often deliberately incorporated Chinese images and introduced a dual calendar format. So it's from here. These dual calendars were introduced into this Chinese local visual culture. An early example of this kind of intercultural representation was made in 1889 by the Barlow and Company, a British firm with branches in Shanghai, Singapore, Calcutta, and Kuala Lumpur. So this company had multiple branches in different Asian cities. Designed by the Shanghai local painter, Zhang Zhiying, and printed in Manchester. This lithograph poster incorporates many popular Chinese beliefs, Chinese motifs, like immortals and historical figures, dragons and phoenix, and unique Chinese architecture forms. Just briefly, like here you can see dragon, phoenix, here like a Chinese, like an archway. Here are like historical, mythological figures like a Monkey King, drunken immortal. So many of these Chinese forms. But also British and Indian images such as boar hunt and the white elephant carrying a hada. So you can see like a boar hunt here, like a British motif, and here more like an Indian motif, and motifs from different countries. Our world map dominates the center and is flanked by two dragon flags of the Qing Empire. Below the map is an open scroll displaying the poster's title, Chinese and English calendar combined, 华英月份盘. The year is written in two ways, as the 15th year in the reign of Guangxu Emperor of the Great Qing, the year of Jichou, that's 1889, and as the 1,889 years to 90 year in the Western calendar. 2 decades before the Republican Revolution, therefore, dual calendars had already entered Chinese popular culture as a part of Western economic expansion. But the 1912 Republican calendar poster was not a commercial advertisement. As a marker of a transformative historical event, an important historical and political event, this new poster also continued the tradition of a single-sheet pictorial calendar in traditional China, which never served directly commercial purposes. Featuring the stove god and goddess, or the god of wealth, their predominant role was to celebrate the beginning of a new year. So this traditional Chinese calendar poster, it mainly to signify transformation between years. So this tradition was absorbed into China's modern political visual culture in the early 20th century. A poster I showed earlier signals such integration. Labeled a calendar poster of the Great Han Republic China, it features both Sun Yat-sen as a democratic president and the boy emperor of the Qing dynasty. We can therefore securely date this poster to the 40 days between January 1st and February 12th, 1912, i.e., between Sun's election and the emperor's abdication. The two vertical strips along the edge of the middle section announce the year for which the poster was made. The 46th or 9th year in the yellow emperor's calendar to the right, and the year 1912 to 1913 in the Western calendar to the left. To signify the Republic's embrace of globalism, the poster features not only Chinese leaders, but also commanders-in-chief of the British, German, and Russian armies. The Qing Emperor's image disappears from a calendar poster of the first year of the Republic of China, which presents Sun Yat-sen as the sole embodiment of New China. The prominent juxtaposition of traditional and Western calendars also acquired renewed significance to indicate China's entrance into the post-revolutionary era. Indeed, under the new regime, starting from this year, both calendars were put in use in organizing public and private life. Historians have looked into the consequence of this practice, focusing on the confusion it caused in coordinating social activities. Other evidence, however, mainly visual evidence, other evidence indicate that people actually actively utilize the hybrid calendrical system to express personal experience in tandem with the drastic historical changes. So it's not just negative, creating a lot of confusion. Actually, these two different systems were used by local people to express their personal feeling, to mark certain moments in their life. In particular, some members of the male population employed dual calendars to frame a crucial moment in their lives when they decided to cut off their queue to become citizens of the Republic. Before putting this decision into practice, they had portraits taken as a memorabilia of the soon-to-be past. So far, I have found 4 such studio photographs, which commemorated the cutting of the queue. Judging from the attire of the subject, these were well-to-do urban young men in their 20s to 30s. They had all determined to follow Sun Yat-sen's model to cut off their queues, but wanted to preserve their images while they still possess this precious bodily feature. This context is best revealed by the 2 photographs which bear inscriptions written by the man in the pictures. One inscription reads, that's a translation of the full inscription written on the back of the photograph. In the 18th month of Renzi, 1912, I determined to cut off my queue. Therefore, I used a large mirror to reflect my back, to preserve the image of my queue for memory's sake. It was on the 3rd day of the 8th month, or September 13th in the new calendar. The photograph was made in the Lifu studio on the upper floor of Quan Yechang. I had 2 prints made and paid 80 cents according to the silver dollars standard, inscribed by Yi An when he was 27 years old. According to Miss Wang Wenjie, who shared this family photo in a magazine called Old Photo, 老照片, the man in the picture is her paternal great-grandfather, whose style name was Yi An. Actually, we don't know his formal name, so we will call him Wang Yi An from now on. Historical records show that the Lifu studio was located in the commercial district south of Beijing. In the picture, Mr. Wang Yian wears a fashionable robe made of shiny patterned silk and with a high collar and a narrow sleeve. A very fashionable young man. You can see those are quite fashionable, well-dressed man. He stands in 3/4 pose while looking at the camera with a, I would say, dejected expression, not very happy, which seems at odds with his opulent clothes and the ornate environment. The photo studio is furnished with trompe-l'oeil murals, potted flowers, and full-length freestanding mirror ornamented with a complex open-work frame. Placed behind him, the mirror captures a clear view of his queue hanging down below his thighs, very long queue. Wang Yi'an's inscription creates an impression that he had made a personal decision to use the floor mirror to preserve the image of his queue. This statement is actually doubtful because another young man, another gentleman, had utilized this same device 4 months earlier in very similar circumstances. Also like Wang Yi'an, this gentleman wrote an inscription on the back of the portrait. A piece of memorabilia of the perished Qing dynasty. This is the last image of my queue. It was taken on the April 4th in the first year of the Republic, or the 17th day of the second month of Renzi, 1912, at 12 o'clock. Again, 12 o'clock is interesting. Again, it's a sense of transition from morning to afternoon. I had this photograph taken before cutting off my queue in order to commemorate the event, inscribed by Yu Xiang. Yu Xiang is the style name of Li Hongchun. In this case, we do know something about this figure. Li Hongchun. The photograph was taken when he was 22, possibly still a law student. According to his daughters, their father was the third son of an affluent family with broad social connections. Living near the main commercial district on the south side of Beijing, he became a patron of Peking opera actors and courtesans, and spent much of his time smoking opium and drinking hard liquor. So we got a sense about this social group, these people. So 5 years apart in age, Li Hongchun and Wang Yi'an lived in the same city in 1912 and may have known each other because the Lifu studio where Mr. Wang Yi'an took his portrait was also located on the south side of Beijing. It's basically a commercial district beyond the front gate, Qianmen. Judging from Wang's portrait, he must have also belonged to a similarly well-to-do social class. In addition to his double image inside and outside the mirror, so let's take a closer look at this particular photograph, a very interesting one. So in addition to his double images inside, outside the mirror, Li appears for a third time in the picture, standing next to himself and the mirror. This effect, as we know, was achieved by using the double exposure method, which had been around for half a century to produce what was called in Chinese 二我图, or images of me and myself. This technical trick was used in this 1912 portrait to convey rather serious meaning in relation to contemporary politics. In the photograph, a frontal portrait of Li occupied the left half of the composition. Standing in a relaxed pose, this well-groomed young man wears a hat and holds a white handkerchief in one hand, seemingly prepared to go out or to receive a visitor. So I'm talking about this figure with a hat, very relaxed. It's like a normal social image. So this normal social image is reversed in the one next to it. So here Li, you can see here, the same man, here Li stands without a hat and turns his back towards the spectator. The image of the second Li is again reversed by the full-length mirror placed in front of him to reflect his face. So here is really mirror is used not to reflect his queue, but reflect his face. We see his cues here, right? So the person inside the mirror stares back at himself as the spectator, with a quizzical expression that seems to be silently asking, is this the last time I ever see myself with a cue? He answered this question on the back of the photograph. As stated in both inscriptions, both men had their portraits taken in anticipation of severing their cues. In other words, they have both decided to alter their hairstyle, but before it happened, they wanted to preserve their images with their cues for posterity. The inscriptions record neither their past existence as a Qing subject, nor their future identity as a cue-less Republican citizens, but define a transitory moment that mingle nostalgia for the past and acceptance of the present. Such a conflicted in-between temporality finds an acute expression in their dating of the portrait. As we have noticed, each man independently used the dual calendars to frame a single event. Li Hongchun further identified the year as the first year of the Republic, hence perceiving the regime as a new beginning in Chinese history. Compared with the public posters we saw earlier and the government documents, Wang and Li used the dual calendars to register personal experience. As Li Hongchun wrote, the Qing had already perished, yet he still retained his cue. As a person, he was living in both the past and the present at this moment. And it was his cue that embodied this dual temporality. When he had the portrait taken, he made clear that the image was, quote unquote, a piece of memorabilia of his soon-to-be severed cue. Facilitated by written words, the portrait linked two histories, one national, one public, national, and the other private and personal, while generating tension between these two histories. So now we move to hair, and as part of the body, but also as a representation of time and this dynastic transition. For over 1,000 years, every educated Chinese memorized and practiced an instruction from the classic of filial piety. One received one's body, hair, and skin from one's parents, and so one dares not damage them. That is the beginning of filiality. Thus, when the Manchus conquered China in 1644 and ordered Chinese men to shave the front of their head and apply their hair down their back in a queue, to do so was considered a forced conversion to barbarism. Compliance means betrayal of one's ancestry and culture. As I mentioned in my last lecture, so there was a nationwide outcry in defiance. Some diehard Confucians committed suicide to protest. But the Manchu rulers, calling their dynasty Qing, made no concession to the resistance. Either shave your hair or lose your head. Anyone who dared to disobey the decree will be executed. Very harsh. As the Qing dynasty gradually consolidated its rule and proved itself to be an enforcer rather than a destroyer of Chinese culture, the alien custom eventually prevailed. With its ethnic origin gradually forgotten, the queue became the standard hairstyle for the male population for the next over 200 years, until its legitimacy was challenged once again in the late 19th to early 20th century. By this time, The Qing had declined from a great empire into a frail giant, incapable of even defending itself. It had lost multiple wars against colonial powers from both West and East, had signed unequal treaties, one after another, to trade its land for temporary peace. In the eyes of the foreign powers, Chinese officials' pigtails were the quintessential sign of backward country, clinging to an archaic past. Ironically, this view was shared by reformist Chinese intellectuals committed to rescuing their country from foreign aggressors. To these reformists, China's survival and revival depended on whether it could transform itself into a modern nation equal to the West and Japan. In service of this cause, the embarrassing pigtail had to go. That's even before the founding of the Republic in 1912, queue-cutting had already gained considerable momentum among reformers and anti-Manchu revolutionaries. Actually, there emerged a movement we can call it queue-cutting movement. The majority of the male population still kept their queues, however. As soon as the Republican government was established, it required all male subjects to sever their queues regardless of difference in class, occupation, and ideology. March 5th, 1912, Sun Yat-sen issued a decree giving an explicit new meaning to queue-cutting. Today, the Manchu dynasty has fallen, and the Republic has succeeded in replacing it. All our countrymen should shed this filthy custom from the old regime to become citizens of the new nation. So it's equal to modern or modernity. Queue-cutting thus came to define citizenship in the new nation state. It was under this decree that Wang Yi'an and Li Hongchun decided to part with their queues in the following months. So here is the context for the earlier portraits. Utilizing textual evidence, historians have explored the complex meanings of queue-cutting in relation to the founding of the Republic, the formation of a modern citizenry, and the social dynamics in early 20th century China. I suggest that photographic images related to queue-cutting tell an equally rich and complex story about early Republican visual culture. These images fall into three groups according to their representational modes and the time when they were taken. The first and earliest group consists of studio photos of famous reformers, revolutionaries, educators, and artists who commissioned these portraits after abandoning their queues. So you see, they don't have queues anymore. It's typically they took those photographs shortly after cutting off their queues. Again, Sun Yat-sen, for example, cut his queue in Yokohama, in Japan, when he escaped to Japan after the failed Canton Uprising in October 1895. He then used many opportunities to display his new image for political purposes. For example, his queue-less image appeared on a poster from that year, I'm talking about the top one, which features him as one of the three leaders of a revived China society called the Xingzhonghui, based in Honolulu. This image then became the prototype of Sun's many public portraits, very similar to this one. This is the first. Including the one on the poster we have studied. Another famous example is Lu Xun, the father of proletarian literature in modern China. He severed his queue in 1903 when he went to Japan to study and took a photograph with a queue cut to send to friends and family members. A poem which he reportedly inscribed on the back of a photograph, which I will discuss later, spells out the meaning of the portrait as a personal declaration announcing a new phase in his life. Such intentionality is shared by many similar photos in this first group. The second group, related to the queue cutting movement, falls into general category of photojournalism, representing queue cutting in action as social events. Some of these pictures were taken on the street immediately after the announcement of the queue cutting decree on January 2nd, 1912. In a non-negotiable manner, the edict demanded that the task be accomplished within 20 days. Those who fail to comply would be punished by law. This photo on the screen, first published on the cover of the March 2nd, 1912 issue of the Illustrated London News, records the actual queue cutting activity taking place on the street in Nanjing, the seat of the Republican government. It shows that queue cutting was pursued through coercion. The central figure, an ordinary laborer in tattered clothes, has been stopped by a uniformed soldier. His long, neatly braided queue has been cut off, held up by the soldier as solemn trophy. Expressions this labor, he diverts his eyes to one side to avoid the camera. He has probably tried to run away, which is why the soldier had to hold him tight to have the picture taken. The irony of this revolutionary act is captured by the title of the photo in the magazine, called Freedom by Force, Compelled to Lose Badge of Servitude. So that's the second group. The third group of photographs related to queue cutting is exemplified by the portrait of Wang Yi'an and Li Hongchun. As we have observed, they took this portrait a few months after the queue cutting decree, but before they finally cut their queue. As such, these images reflect a reluctant compliance with the official policy. These young men were neither revolutionaries who cut their queues to demonstrate their political aspirations, nor common folks who had to be coerced to change their hairstyle. To them, losing the queue was a personal event full of nostalgia and sorrow, and they expressed this feeling through both verbal and visual representation. Here I turn to photography, especially the meaning of this kind of portrait. Portraiture and self-portraiture are two standard genres in visual art, including photography. A self-portrait is a likeness whose subject is the artist him herself. A portrait is a representation of a person made by someone else. This seemingly self-evident classification is disrupted by some of the studio portraits introduced above, I discussed earlier, whose inscriptions imbued with a distinct I voice express the seer's personal experience and aspirations and transformed the anonymous portrait into a composite representation of the self. I call these images I portraits and suggest that they constituted a specific type of portraiture around this particular moment in Chinese history and art history. An excellent example of this image type is the well-known portrait of the young Lu Xun, which we have seen earlier. According to Xu Shoutang, Lu Xun's closest friend in Japan, Lu gave him this portrait after he cut off his queue to show his new look, and inscribed the back of the photograph with a poem called Self-Inscription on an Informal Likeness, 自题小象. This inscribed photo no longer exists, but has been reconstructed like this. The poem reads, "My mind fails to avert arrows of the gods. The wind rains blacken boulders, darken my old home." That's China. "I entrust my thought to the star of cold night. The king doesn't understand. I would offer up my blood to Xuan Yuan, China's progenitor." So it's a kind of revolutionary poem, and written at the end of the Qing dynasty. Any student in China knows these lines. Many have been influenced by them. Eva Shanzhou, a Lu Xun scholar who has written a lens on this poem, has argued that it is distinguished by an ardent and nationalistic tone. She writes, "The verbs especially are strong and unwavering." Equally important is the young poet's emphatic use of the first-person voice. Every sentence starts from an explicit or implied I, and the last line represents 我 or I twice in rapid succession. 我以我血, I use my blood. To intensify the feeling of heroism and self-sacrifice. This first-person voice is substantiated by the image. In the picture, Lu Xun wears a military-style jacket that must be his school uniform. We see, as his friend Xu Shoutang saw upon receiving the picture, that Lu has taken off his cap to expose the newly grown hair on the front of his head. As such, the portrait both represented and presented a new transformed self. Inscribed on the photo, the poem seems to me emanate directly from the young man in the picture. "I entrust my thought to the star of a cold night. The king doesn't understand. I would offer up my blood to Xuan Yuan, China's progenitor." Traditional Chinese art is well known for integrating words and images. The art of portraiture participates in this tradition. It is now rare to find a painted portrait bearing inscriptions, sometimes written by the subject himself. Paired with the image, such self-inscriptions often reflect on the nature of the portrait from a detached third-person perspective. In this context, a portrait is frequently compared with a shadow, yin, or dream, meng. The Ming master painter Shen Zhou we see here, for example, wrote 2 inscriptions on one of his portraits by an anonymous painter on 2 separate occasions. The first text, written in 1507, questions the image's reliability and stressed the importance of one's inner virtue. The second inscription, from a year later, translated here, draws an analogy between the image and the dream, in that both were real and unreal. So the image and real are very similar. They are real, but also unreal. We cannot decide. So there is a kind of skepticism. In a similar vein, Emperor Qianlong of the Qing dynasty repeatedly inscribed a poem on a series of double portraits of himself, wondering about the disparities between the painting and his real person. So there are quite a few of these different versions of these compositions. So Emperor Qianlong is sitting here, then his image appears for a second time. Then in the poem, he say it's 1 or 2, so begin to wonder about his identity and the meaning of the portrait. This pre-modern tradition continued after the invention of photography. In an essay titled A Paper Mirror, Autobiographical Memories in Modern Chinese Poetry, literary scholar, literary historian Shengqing Wu analyzed a sizable group of poems titled Self-Eulogy, 自赞, or Self-Inscription, 自题, on the writer's own photographic portraits. That's from much later, late 19th, early 20th century. So the inscriptions were written on the photographic portraits. So dating from this late period, many of these verses continue to utilize the traditional rhetorical strategy to perceive a portrait as an illusion and contrast it with the actual self. So against this background, we recognize a special feature of the group of inscribed photographs studied in this talk. Not only Lu Xun's portrait with a cue card, but also the studio photos of Wang Yi'an and Li Hongchun. Their inscriptions, whether in prose or verse, say nothing about the time-honored image self-dualism. Instead, they express the experience, feeling, and aspiration of the photographic subject in a direct, unproblemized manner. We have discussed the ardent and nationalistic tone of Lu Xun's self-inscription on small likeness. With regard to the portrait of Wang Yi'an and Li Hongchun, the inscriptions identify the sitters and their motivations in taking the pictures. There is no musing of the duality between image and self. The photographs were themselves. It is in this sense that I call these and similar inscribed studio photos I-portrait. This conceptualization is based on two sets of factors. One set applies to all photographic portraits bearing the sitter's inscriptions, regardless whether they can be defined as I-portrait. That's the first group. In all these cases, an inscription transforms a portrait in three crucial ways. First, it turns a photograph from a duplicable print into a unique, singular object carrying the hand trace of the person in the picture. And second, it creates a word-image dynamic as an intrinsic condition for comprehending the portrait. And third, it bestows the portrait with a special function and social mobility, since each inscription often has a specific purpose and the implied reader. The second set of factors is restricted to the inscribed portraits that are called I-portrait. These include an unambiguous first-person voice, a direct statement of the subject experience and aspirations, and a neglect of the image self-dualism in the inscription. An additional factor is performative quality. Many examples of I-portraits imply action. Lu Xun's portrait with the cue cut is meant to show his new look after severing the queue. Wang Yi'an and Li Hongchun displayed their cues to the camera before cutting them off. It appears that when people wrote inscriptions on or about their photographic portrait in late 19th and early 20th century China, some of them followed the pre-established convention in painting to contemplate on the illusory nature of their images, whereas others turned away from this conventional perception by dismissing the duality between portrait and self. In this second mode, a portrait merges with the photographic subject or supersedes the subject. This new perception at the core of various Aight portraits is closely related to photography's media specificity. As a visual technology newly introduced to China, photography immediately demonstrated its power in reconfiguring the relationship between representation and the reality. It collapsed a rigid distinction between these two, between what is image, what is real, collapse, by mapping images onto their subjects, hence separating photography from traditional portrait painting. Shenzhou's portrait shows that a painted likeness, even when the artist's name is lost, still registers the painter's hand that signifies the work's authorship. In contrast, most portraits produced in commercial photo studios remain naturally anonymous because they do not claim authorship. Customers receive them without knowing who has made them. As demonstrated by the cases we have studied, when China was entering the modern era, these autonomous images made with the aid of camera were readily connected with new types of subjective experience, hence the creation of called Aight portrait. Finally, a coda. There is another group of portraits, another group of photos related to queue cutting, which will take us back to the issue of dynastic time and bring this whole series of lectures to a close. The sole subject of these images is the last emperor, Yixinkiro Pu Yi. We call him Pu Yi. Shown in the center of this 1912 calendar poster we saw, like a boy. Merely 5 years old when the Republican Revolution took place, he was allowed to live in the Forbidden City after abdicating the throne. His life took a turn in 1919. Actually, after he was 13 that year, took life in this sealed quarter of the Forbidden City. One Oxford-trained former British diplomat named Reginald Fleming Johnson was appointed his English tutor. Recalling his relationship with Johnson, the last Emperor Pu Yi wrote half a century later in his memoir, I quote, "In my eyes, everything Johnson did was the best. He made me feel that foreigners were the wisest and the most civilized people, and he the most learned man of all Westerners." That's from a later memoir. Johnson, whose Chinese name is Zhuang Shidun, established such authority over Pu Yi through daily interactions. He showed the young man foreign magazines filled with World War I pictures of aircraft, tanks, and artillery, and talked about their functions and different makes. He brought Pu Yi European candies, and he explained how the modern knowledge of chemistry helped produce them. He lectured on Tea Party manners. Little by little, these instructions opened up an alluring world for the boy emperor and shaped his imagination of himself, not as a successor of Manchu royalty, but as, in his own words, a gentleman in the British tradition. When Johnson compared the queue disparagingly to a pigtail, no further persuasion was needed for Pu Yi to get rid of these undignified bodily features. This event took place on April 27, 1922, so 10 years later, after the Republican Revolution. So all these people, Pu Yi and his servants, his ministers, living in the Forbidden City, they still kept their queues for these 10 years. So within the next few days, more than 1,000 other queues inside the Forbidden City were gone, constituting a small revolution within the tiny remaining section of the Qing dynasty. Many photos that Puyi took after this event displayed his new look. The earliest ones show a young man who has grown short hair in the originally shaven part of his head. A slightly later picture features him next to Johnson, dressed like an English gentleman. This photo must have been taken before September 1924, when Puyi was forced out of the Forbidden City. The entire Forbidden City was then taken over by the Republican government to be transformed into a public museum, today's Palace Museum. A special committee was appointed to inventory the imperial possessions. What they found among numerous treasures and ancient relics was Puyi's queue, cut off neatly at the root. A photograph of it appeared in the Palace Museum Weekly in early 1931. At this time, the controversy about queue cutting was largely forgotten. The Republic was entering the 12th year of its existence and continued to fight for its control over the whole country. Japan was completing preparation to invade China, that's 1931. And Puyi would soon be installed as a puppet ruler of Manchuria, renamed Manchukuo by the Japanese. Although his saber queue was far from ancient, he had cut it off less than a decade before. It was perceived as an ancient relic featured together with Shang bronzes and Song paintings in the museum weekly. Luan Qian, a member of the museum board and the discoverer of this silver queue, even wrote a poem in the style of lamenting the past, Huaigu, to commemorate its finding. This image thus adds another layer of temporality to the photographs studied in this lecture, taken before, during, and shortly after the cutting of the queue. Instead of registering real historical events and sentiments related to the queue cutting movement, Puyi's queue provides the ultimate proof of the queue's already realized deaths, hence bringing closure to China's 2,000 years long dynastic history. And here's the end of my lecture. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.